Hey, hey everybody. Welcome back. This is part two of our formal analysis. We're still on Learning Unit 1. So last time we talked about the elements of design. This time we're going to be talking about the principles of design. So last time it was, what were they? Line, shape, color, texture, space, and time. I think there's one more I'm missing. With the principles, there's 6 of them: balance, emphasis, proportion and scale, rhythm and repetition, variety and unity. So, with the elements of design, those are the building blocks, and all the how all the pieces then fit together to form a whole. So that whole, that composition, that's what the 6 principles work together to form. They create a sense of harmony in a completed work. Um, Artists intuitively know how to make the right decisions in order to have a balance of all the principles of design, and also the elements of design. So the elements are used to follow the certain principles and they create the overall composition. Does that make sense? Um, you know, we're going to be breaking everything down and discussing them one by one so we can develop our vocabulary. However, remember that everything's ideally kind of working together, and we can isolate an element here and an element there, but usually there's at least a couple working in conjunction together to form that whole picture. But when we're talking about maybe subjective stuff on how it made you feel, remember to bring it back to principles of design and elements of design. And that's what my goal is, for you guys to be able to write argumentative analysis. Okay, so you're justifying your opinions based on things that are kind of concrete and really there, right? So that's where the argument comes in. And art historical analysis is very heavily based on arguments, as we're going to find out. So, here's an example of the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci. It's his famous study of the human figure and its proportions. There's a lot of kind of deep philosophical stuff going on here with this figure and with the circumscribed circle and square. Circle represents the heavenly celestial realm, where the square represents the earthly realm. So he's kind of drawing a parallel between how humans, or man, embody both, within themselves. They embody this godlike nature as well as this kind of like physical nature. We have the figure kind of with the arms outstretched and the feet together on one, and then superimposed on that is the arms going higher and the legs spreading out. Da Vinci included all the principles of design here. The figure is perfectly balanced and symmetrical. The navel in the center is the emphasis, also called the focal point. Different concepts are unified here as a whole, right? So the earthly and the spiritual, represented by the square and the circle. But basically, I chose this example to illustrate the principles of design, because everything's in proportion. Because of how he superimposed the two figures, there's kind of a rhythm and repetition, and there's also becomes a sense of variety, and of course it is a cohesive whole. So that's our unity. So balance, it's not necessarily just, straight symmetrical stuff. Balance can be asymmetrical. So based on how big things are, and how what color they are and how saturated they are, that creates a visual weight in the picture, right? So balance is dealing with that visual weight, the apparent lightness or heaviness of shapes and forms that are arranged together in a composition. So let's look at a couple different types of balance. Here's, this is showing asymmetrical balance. The Taj Mahal, epic example of symmetrical balance in architecture. We can often go towards architecture to find that symmetrical balance. Also, radial balance is something found in nature and a lot of non-Western art traditions. Here's a Mayan calendar. So a radial balance means that there's a central point where everything radiates outward from and everything's equidistant. So think of a flower petal or, the sun. Those are other examples of radial balance. Okay, emphasis is a good principle to start with if you're confused as to where to start. Artists use emphasis to bring your attention to where they want you to look. So usually there's emphasis in one area of the work, and that's kind of another way we can tie in relating form to content, because we can say, hey, because he's emphasized, this head here, Judith has beheaded, Salome has beheaded John the Baptist. That's the focal point, that's the emphasis in the composition, which relates to content. And so we use different elements to establish emphasis. We create by creating strong contrasts of light and color. Okay, proportion. So, artists can manipulate scale by the way they depict the relative size of objects. So, maybe one of the ways is depicting pictorial depth or spatial recession to show perspective by showing something closer to us as larger, and perhaps this something the same size seems smaller further away. So for instance, this Hokusai's Great Wave is kind of, really big in proportion to Mount Fuji in the back. So, the scale helps us measure visually the space in what we're looking at, in the scenes we're looking at. When a mountain fills a small percentage of the space in the painting, we know that it's farther away, right? Looking at an artwork, we're judging the different subjects we're judging the size based on what's around other elements in the painting. So here's a sculpture by Claes Oldenburg, and he kind of makes these really, really, really large scale sculptures of everyday items and kind of sometimes pairs them in interesting ways. There's a couple Claes Oldenburg sculptures in San Francisco with the big bow, Cupid's span, which is, an Embarcadero. There's also Claes Oldenburg giant safety pin at the De Young Museum. And here's a giant lipstick in a tank. Proportion becomes important when we're looking at, figurative stuff. So, in the Renaissance, everyone was doing linear perspective, and the perfect proportions of the human body was something that artists were very interested in, and doing studies of anatomy and getting very kind of realistic and naturalistic. There is a canon of proportions that was actually derived in the Greek era, so that's ancient classical stuff. And so basically it was delineated by the perfect proportion of the human being based on the head. So having, the head, and then the whole body is going to be 8 heads long. So that's, according to the canon, the height of the head is 1/8 of the total height of the body. The width of the shoulders, 1/4 of the total height of the body. So you can see mathematics is really involved in determining scale and proportion of art objects. I would say, yeah, one of my definite favorite principles of design is rhythm and repetition. So, when similar or like elements, such as shapes and colors, are repeated over and over again, this creates a visual rhythm in the composition. You can see that here with our Warhol Madonna screen print. Sorry, Marilyn Monroe screen print. Patterns created from rhythm and repetition can also then imply movement and time. So here we have time, the element of time popping up in our discussion. So remember, I want you to be using these words to describe artworks in question in your written analysis, and also the assignments, and just be drilling yourself on different elements and principles when you look at any artwork. So another really important principle is variety. So again, going back to like artists having so many choices, right? All the different types of line, form, color, texture, other elements, how to pick and choose them, how to make them all coexist together in one single work. So oftentimes our most powerful artworks embody tension that the artist is then balancing. So there might be kind of some elements and principles that are at odds with each other, but because the artist manages to kind of place them in a way that creates unity, that allows us to kind of have a lot of variety in an artwork. Here's a scene of ballerinas dancing by Degas. So, one can see that the possibilities are endless. And, the different artists are making the choices based on what they want to express. So, there's a context to what choices they're making and why. Unity is when all the different elements and principles of design come together to create that sense of completeness and wholeness. Each of the different principles of design work together to lead to unity. And so then there's just this sense of completion in the composition. So I've broken down the principles and elements of design, and we've talked about formal analysis as being separate from contextual analysis. But, our next category is going to be contextual analysis. So that is when we're going to be talking about like the content, the subject matter, the style, history, etc. But please incorporate formal analysis into your context. So, the artist's choices. Why did they make those choices? Here's a great painting of Louis XIV, who we're going to be talking about. He kind of changed the art world and brought the focus to Paris. It moved from Rome to Paris, based on the academies he established. He was short, so he's wearing heels. He was definitely very much into this kind of ostentatious show of, his wealth and his status. He equated himself with the sun god Apollo. So you can understand he's always going to want to be presented in this kind of grand fashion. So again, go back, take notes on the different elements and principles. Start looking around and describing your visual culture around you using the different elements and principles. And I will see you on our next presentation, contextual analysis.